In this WellSeeker Pro training video, I'll be introducing server database operations. This training is specifically for companies and personnel using SQL server databases and will focus on the recommended procedures regarding how to set up and run a job from pre-job through to post-job. These procedures are designed to aid both office and field personnel by providing a structured, repeatable workflow to follow. So this training video will focus on 4 key areas. Pre-job, which is all office-based steps. Job start, which is rigsite steps. Real-time monitoring, again this is office steps where we'll look at office tools that are used while the job is running. And post-job steps, which is again office steps. Before we start, I want to mention that in general it will only be office personnel, so well planners, coordinators, managers, etc., who will be accessing the server database directly. While field personnel will be pushing and pulling data to and from the server, they will not be required to physically access the server database and will instead be working in a local database. So the first thing that we need to do here is to actually access the server database. When you first open WellSeeker, even if the last database that you were in was the server database, you will always open the last local database that you had accessed. And you can see that from the bottom of your screen. And in my case, I've got a database on my desktop. But if I want to access the SQL Server database, I need to do that via the File menu, SQL Server Databases, Connect to Remote Database. And that's going to open this dialog. And this is where we enter all the relevant login credential information that we have. So we've got our database IP URL, database name, port, database username, database password, and then our individual username and our individual passwords. If we select Save Passwords here, these will be saved every time we open this dialog, and all that we'll need to do is hit Connect. So if I hit Connect now, database connection established, and I can see at the bottom of my screen, this is telling me that I've now accessed my remote database. And we can see that everything looks exactly the same as it did when I was accessing my local database. The layout, the functionality is the same, but there are a few little differences that we need to be aware of. So one of the first things to be aware of is in the Tools menu, under Admin Tools, there is an option that specifies user permissions. Now you can only access this if you are classed as an administrator, and in here this determines the usernames, it has everyone's password, and then we have relevant permissions that each person has. So the ability to create new items, delete items, edit items, are you an administrator, are you an approver. In the local database there is no restrictions and you have the ability to do whatever you want. However, when you are in the server database, you will only be able to do what you have been given in terms of permissions. So be aware of this. If you're trying to create or copy or delete within the server, if you're not able to do that, it may be down to your user permissions. So at this point, we would now be looking to pull in the relevant Compass export file. And this export file would need to include the final signed off well plan, along with any offset wells that are not already in the database. Now for the purposes of this training, I've already pulled in the Compass export file to save a little bit of time. If you're not familiar with this process, then there is another training video that covers this, and I would recommend that you watch that before you continue. So I've pulled in my Compass export file, I've done the relevant checks, and I'm happy that my plan and my offsets are all in correctly. And the well that we are going to be working in is going to be Cerberus 3H, and we can see we have a principal plan here for this. And what we now need to do is we now need to create an actual well bore underneath our well. And this is going to allow us to set up the survey and the daily drilling report for the field engineers. By doing this pre-job, it means that the field engineers don't have to do it, and it also ensures that the setup is exactly the way that you want it to be for each job. So in order to set up an actual well, at your well level, you're going to right click and you're going to select Insert New Actual Well. So this is going to open our actual well properties dialog, and we can now start to enter some of the information that we need. So we'll put in our well name, actual well name. And then we have got some things that we need to check in here. So we have got our vertical section, our depth reference, and our magnetics. And we want to check that these are the same as our plan. So what we can do is you would take your planning report, and this is the planning report for the 3H, the principal well, or the principal well plan. And we will check our vertical section. So our vertical section azimuth 144.854, that is correct. Our rotary table depth reference elevation information, so 333.02 and 310.02 for ground level, so that's correct. And then our magnetics, and our magnetics is important for our anti-collision because this information is used as part of the calculation for our ellipses of uncertainty, so it's important that this information is in correctly, and it will, in most cases, if it's not exactly the same as the plan may have been done earlier, then you may have a separate geomag sign-off sheet that you need to check this against. But in this case, it's going to be the same as the plan. So we'll check down here. We've got our date, we've got our declination, we've got our dip, 57.583, and we have our total magnetic field strength, which is the same. So we're happy that this information here is correct. This is going to be from surface, so there's nothing sidetrack related we need to do, and we've basically done everything that we need to in here now. So all we're going to do is hit apply, and we're going to hit close. Now that our new actual wellbore has been created, we need to create a survey, and we can do that by right clicking at the same level with this little red symbol, insert new survey, and we can give this a name. So we'll just call this surface. We're going to be tying on from surface, so we don't need to select any of these options. And then the survey instrument for this is going to be MWD plus IFR1 plus MS for multi-station analysis. So IFR1 plus MS. Now that we've got this set up, we can just hit apply and close. And we can see over here now we have our new survey underneath our actual wellbore. So we double left click on the survey to open it up. Now it's open, we can see this is just basically going to be ready for the field engineers. When they start drilling, they can just start putting the surveys in here. And all it will do is we're going to press save. Do you wish to add the survey to the survey program? Yes, I do. And then we'll close this. And if I right click at my actual well, again and hit properties, we can see that the survey program will now populate in here. And there's nothing in there, but it has populated because we've hit save. We now need to select the relevant offset wells, and the reason that we'll do that is because it simplifies the process for the guys on the rig when they're downloading the data from the server. When they're pulling the data down on the remote data fetch, it will mean that if you have all the correct wells selected under the actual wellbore, you only have to choose this one well, and it will pull this well along with all of the offsets. So this is a very important process. And to do that, we're going to open our actual wellbore, and this is where you have to be careful. You have to open the actual wellbore and not the survey itself. So once you're in the actual wellbore, you're now going to open up the offset selector, and that can be opened up from the toolbar, or it can be opened up from the tools menu. And this will now give us the option of selecting any of the offset wells that we want to. So I'm going to go through here and I'm going to choose all the relevant wells that we want to offset. Now here, this is the actual well that we're in. It's not giving us this option, which makes sense because this is the reference well. But I am going to select my plan for the well I'm drilling. So this is the principal plan for 3H, and that's important because that needs to come down as well. So just take care at this stage, make sure that you select all the correct wells. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit apply. So we're now going to insert a BHA, and to do that we can either leave the actual well open, or in my case I'm going to close it, and we go to our actual well level, which is with this little red symbol, and we can right click, go to reporting and select drill string editor. And in order to create the new BHA, we select this big green plus button, and we'll see that we now have the ability to enter our BHA. So we're going to put a description, we'll put in the BHA number, you can also put in the MWD number if you wish as well, and we're going to hit save. This is not so much a case at this point of filling this in completely. This is just a placeholder for the directional drillers. When they come, this will be already created, then they can go through and they can create this based on what's going to be running the hole. If at this point you know the BHA, of course you can fill it in as required, but at the moment, for this particular example, we're just going to leave this like a placeholder. So this will be blank, but it will be available for the guys to fill in directly once they draw the data down and they have a requirement to do so. So we'll just close that. We're now going to take a look at the well permissions, and they're accessed via the Tools menu, Admin Tools, Well Permissions. Now again, this is a feature that is only available on the SQL Server database. Now this is quite an important feature because when the field engineers arrive on a job, they will connect to the server and they will draw the data that they require from the server onto their computer. When they do this, they will have access to all of the wells within the database. If you utilize well permissions, you can control this so that they only have access to specific wells. And in that way, they cannot then access other things that they're not supposed to, but it also means that they can't accidentally pull anything down that they shouldn't. If this is not enabled, when they access via the remote data fetch, they will be able to draw anything down. If this is enabled, then up in the top part of the dialog, you are able to then select a well name, or you can select the job number, and you would then put the computer name of the computer that is on the rig site. Now this is specifically the computer name as it is named within the Windows operating system, and you would put the computer name in here and you would select this as active. If you do this for all of the wells and all of the fields, for all the jobs that you've got running, it means that when the guys, when the field engineers try to do the remote data fetch, they will see the database tree, but there will only be one well that they are actually able to select from the tree. And that way, as I mentioned before, it controls the data that they have access to. You do have to be very careful with this though, because if this is enabled and you don't have any details in here, then nobody will be able to pull anything down from the server. If the guys arrive in the field and the computer name hasn't been put in correctly, or you've forgotten to do it, they will not be able to draw anything down either. So this is a very useful feature, but care needs to be taken with it. And if there is ever a problem with the field engineers being able to access data to pull it down to the field, then this is the first place that you would want to look and check, is it enabled? Do you want it enabled? And if it is enabled, do you have the correct computer name and the correct job selected in here? So we'll just keep this unchecked, we'll hit apply and close. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is the personnel names and details dialog, and that's accessed via the Tools menu, personnel name and details. And in this dialog, this is where you can enter all of the field engineers that you have within the company, all of the DD coordinators, MWD coordinators, and if you work on the same rig on a regular basis and you know the name of, for example, the company man, the drilling engineer, geologist, etc., you can put these in here as well. So the first thing you would do is you would enter the person's name. From the drop down, you have a few options to select. And within the daily reporting itself, when it comes to the the personnel section where you can choose who the directional drillers are, who the MWD engineers are. You can either enter those names manually, or there is an ability to have a checkbox where you have the drop down menu. And if you have that selected and active, then anybody within the personnel details table will be available to select. And this is very useful because it just means then it's very quick and easy to select people. There's no issues with people typing names in incorrectly. It's the same across the whole company. It also keeps some contact details in here as well. So you can utilize this and put as much information in here as you want, or as little. But it is there to make life easier. So if you fill in these details, you will see later on in the training where you're able to select this information from. Also from the tools menu, we have a rigs name. So again, if you work with the same rigs consistently and you follow them from job to job, you can put the rig names in here, and this will then make them available from the drop down menu within the daily reporting, and just make it easier for you to grab a hold of those instead of having to type them each time. We're now going to take a look at the daily reporting dialog itself, and this can be accessed from the actual well level by right clicking and going to reporting and selecting daily reporting. It can also be accessed from the shortcut toolbar along the top, and this will open our daily reports dialog. So there are a few things that we're going to want to do here, either from a setup point of view or just to check that the data that we need is in here so that the guys have it when they pull the data down in the field. So the first thing that I would do is in the well status, from the drop down list, would check this to upcoming, and that way you will then be able to see within the server database, when you're searching through your wells, this will be classed as an upcoming well. We can also enter in here our directional drilling coordinator and our MWD coordinator. Again, we talked about the personnel names and details section. Anybody that's in there as a directional drilling coordinator or has an MWD coordinator beside their name as their job title will be available from these drop-down menus. So well status, DD coordinator, MWD coordinator. We now want to take a look at our activity codes, cost codes and phase codes to make sure that these are all as they need to be for the field engineers, because these are going to be very important. They're selected from the drop-down menus within the daily activity and also within the daily costs, and everything that's available from these drop-down menus is fed from these tables. So the first thing that we'll take a look at here is our phase codes, and the phase codes are entered at operator level. So these phase codes will relate to everything below that given operator. If you've already drilled a well, the same phase codes from the previous well will be in here. If this is your first well, you may need to enter the phase codes in here, but in most cases you'll have entered this in once, and it's just a case of a quick check to make sure that all the relevant phases that you have are in here. So I'll hit close, we're happy with those. And that was, I accessed that via this shortcut menu here, and it's also available from the tools drop down here, phase codes. So the next thing that we'll look at are our activity codes. So again, that can be accessed from the tools menu, and it can also be accessed from this shortcut toolbar menu. Now our activity codes, this is the options that we will have available to select on each line of our daily drilling report to show exactly what we've done. There are 147 activity codes available within the software when it's first installed, but as a user you have the ability to check which ones are active, you can remove any that you don't want, and you can add any that you would prefer to use instead, or rename these. The main thing is you just want to check that all of the correct codes are in here and that they are all selected as active. This is another option that's entered at operator level, and the activity codes that you see here will be available for all wells below operator level. So you can expect that once you've drilled one well and you've got these organised, they won't change. So it's just a case of just double checking what you have here. Hitting close or apply and close if you make any changes. And then we want to take a look at our cost codes. So the cost codes again are available from the tools menu or from the toolbar along the top here. So in the case of the cost codes, it's the red $sign. The daily costs would be the black $sign. The cost codes. Now these cost codes are entered at well level. It may be a case of when you open this that there are no cost codes here, in which case you would enter the relevant cost codes. Anything that's entered at this cost code level becomes available to select in a drop-down menu for the daily costs. So if you go to the daily costs, to the drop-down menu, and something's missing, it's because it's missing from this cost codes table. So again, important before the job rolls out that you make sure that you've got all the relevant costs that you want the field engineers to be able to select in this table. And if you're happy with this, then hit apply and hit close. So we now want to access the personnel details section because there are some things we want to enter in here before the job starts so that the field engineers have this data when they draw the information down. But in order to access the well data and personnel, which is available from this drop-down menu here, we first have to create our first daily report. If we try to do this when we don't have our first daily report created, it's going to give us a warning to say to add well data, personnel data, you must firstly select add daily report. So we'll again use this big green plus button here to add our daily report. And when we add the daily report, the report number becomes available, the fluids and drilling parameters and the daily activity go from being greyed out to being white so that we can start to enter information. Now we're not going to enter any information in here. This will be something that the directional drillers will do on the rig site. But now that we've created this, we have report 1, we can now access our well data and personnel. So that can also be accessed from this shortcut button here. And this opens the well data and personnel dialog, and within here you can put all the relevant personnel, their times on and off shift, and we've got a lot of information down the left hand side, things like job number, API job, state, county, rig, the various different companies that are on site, along with a lot of other information. Now most of the information in here can be filled in easily by the field personnel, but there are a couple of things that it's probably worth entering now so that when the data is drawn down from the server, the field engineers have it and they don't need to contact the office to look for it. So the first one would be the job number. So if we just enter our job number in here, and we can also enter our API job number. And any other relevant information that would normally come from the office. We're going to leave, in this example, we're not going to fill in any of the personnel details, we're not going to put in the reg, case and shoe information. This can all be done by the guys in the field. But this information usually comes from the office anyway, and if it's here, it means that you won't be asked for it because it will be available to the engineers when they start the job. So we'll hit apply, and we will hit save. It's going to give us a warning to tell us that we're missing a phase. We don't worry about that at the moment because again, this is just a template. This is just the first daily report has been made available. So we'll hit OK, and we're now in a position that we've set up the daily reports section as much as required before the job starts. Again, as long as you've hit save, we can close this. And the last thing that we will want to do before this is ready to then be sent out to the field is at the actual well level, if we right click, so again this level with the little red symbol, we are able to add external files. And this option just allows us to add any external files that we want the field engineers to have, so when they do the remote data fetch to pull the data from the server down onto their local computer, it will pull these external files. So for example, one of the things that we might want to look for is the report. So just the planning report for the well that we're going to be drilling. Hit open. So once we've selected it from the folder, we can then hit add. It will then add it under here, and we can select on it and we can select to open the file. It will open the file, and when this is drawn down, anything that we have under here will be available to the field engineers. So any additional paperwork that you want to send out can be put in here, and it can also be broken down into different sections. So in this case I downloaded this under all, but it could have been downloaded under well planning, and all that you would do is you would add it in here, and it would then be differentiated from the other files because it would be under the well planning section. So once you put all your files in there, all you have to do is hit close, and we are now completed everything that we need for stage 1. All the information that's on the server is up to date, it's ready to go, and when the job starts, the field engineers will now be able to download this from the server, and they will be able to start drilling the well. So in this section we'll be focusing on the rig site operations and the various procedures required to set up the field laptop and then start pushing data back to the server. So the first thing that you'll do when you arrive on site as a field engineer is you open your DD laptop and open WellSeeker. And when you do that, WellSeeker will access the last database that was accessed by the program when it was closed. That database will probably contain some information in the database tree, probably from the previous job. Now, while there's no issues drawing the data down into this particular database, it's always recommended that at the start of a job you create a blank database, and that way you're only going to have the wells in your database tree that are relevant to the job that you're on, and then there can be no confusion. So in order to create a new database, we'll just go File, Create New Database, choose a location for the database. I would recommend that you don't put this on your desktop, as it's very easy to move or delete things from the desktop by mistake. So you're better putting that somewhere else within your computer, in your documents folder for example, or a job folder off your desktop, and put it there. So for our case we're just going to call this Training Database. We'll hit save. The database has been successfully created. Now we are still in the original database that we were in when we opened the program. We now need to select our new database, and we do that via the File, Select Database, Training, and we hit Open. And we can see we have a database tree with nothing in it now, and at the bottom of our screen we can see the local database, the file path for the local database that we have created and that we are now accessing. So now that we have our blank database, we need to populate it with the data for the job, and we can do that via the Tools menu, Remote Data Fetch, and that's going to open the Data Fetch dialog. And the first thing to understand is that in order for this to work, you need to have an internet connection. The next important thing that you need to consider are the IP address and the port. So this information needs to be entered, and this is basically the data that points the software towards the company's server so that it knows where to look for the data to pull it down. This information will be supplied by the company. If you have this in incorrectly, then basically this process will not work and it will throw up an error. So the first thing you need to make sure is you have your IP and your port entered in here correctly. The next thing to understand is that there are several ways to pull the data from the server. You can manually select it in the database tree, you can filter it out, and you can also use this option which is called Auto Pull Offsets. And what this means is that if you select one well in the database tree, if there are any offset wells selected in the server, it will not just pull down the well you've selected, but it will also pull all the offsets as well. So this is the option that you want to select, because in the office, prior to the job starting, someone will have gone in and they will have selected the offset wells on the actual wellbore for the well that you're going to drill. So it means that for field personnel, you only have to pick one well and don't have to worry about the offsets, because these will come in automatically. So choose this option here, and then we hit connect. And assuming everything works okay, your database tree will populate on the left hand side. If there are any errors, they will populate on the right hand side, and it will give you an indication as to what the problem is. It may say check port, check IP address, or something similar. So now that we have our database tree, we can utilize the filters down the bottom if these are checked. So you can look for options based on the rig. You can search for the job number. In our case, it's a very small database. There's only a few wells in here really, so it's fairly easy to find the well that we're looking for. You can also filter it by status as well. So you can be looking for active wells, standby, TD, upcoming. And if you want to do that, you can select filter by status and you can check it to upcoming. If you do that and you have already connected, you have to connect again in order for this to be actioned. So if I now hit connect, it will give me a warning. Only wells with upcoming status will be displayed. We'll hit OK. And again, if we take a look at this, what we can see is that it's only the wells that have got upcoming status, and this is the well that we want, that are available. All these other wells here, we don't have an option to go below well level, so you do not have an option to pull anything in here, and that's because I have selected this. So this is a very quick way of filtering things so that you can only access the things that are of interest to you. If I was to uncheck this filter and hit connect again, I would have the ability to select any of these wells, and we could go down and we could select multiple wells, but for us, because we have auto pull offset selected, I'm only going to choose the actual well bore. So you would just check at this level, make sure these options are checked as well, which they should be done automatically, and I'm not going to worry about anything else, and I'm just going to hit pull selected. It's giving me an option here now, and it's saying duplicates for this coordinate reference system found. Do you wish to overwrite all duplicates? Yes, I do. And we can see in the right hand box here, it's now starting to populate with the various bits of information. So it's telling us that it's importing, it's pulling the files, and those files have been completed. And it will do this for the reference well and all the offsets. Data successfully pulled from remote database, hit OK. We can see that on the left hand side in our database tree we've got an operator now where we didn't have it before, and all I need to do is hit close. And if we look in our database tree, certainly we have our actual well, we have a principal plan, and we have all the offset wells that were selected on the server database. So now that all the data has been pulled in, there are a few things that we can do to check that everything is pulled in correctly. So the first thing that you would do up at your actual well level is to right click and go to external files. And this is where you'll see any external files that have been associated with this actual well, and you'll be able to open them. You can save them onto your computer if you wish. In this case, we've got the report, the planning report, so we can click on it and select open, and that has opened the planning report for this well in PDF. And I can now, we can close this, and the next thing that we can do is we can double check our plan, and we can double check our tie on line. We can double check all the lines in our plan, the bottom line especially, to make sure that it ties in. If we go to the plan level, we can also then check our plan properties, so we can check the vertical section is correct, we can check our rotary table elevation, our magnetics, and we can also check our survey program to make sure that the correct instrument performance models are assigned. There are lots of checks that we can do here. We can go up at well level, we can check surface locations as well, and when we're happy with the plan, the next thing we can do is we can go on and we can double check that we have all the relevant offset wells that we should have, and they could be displayed possibly in an anti-collision scan, or there may be a document telling us the offset wells that we need. So we would just double check that we have got all the relevant offset wells. And then the next thing we would do is we would go to our actual well and we will check the properties in here as well. And again, we're going to check things like the vertical section, the elevations, the magnetics, and we can see we have a survey program in here, and we can also just quickly open the survey. This has been set up in the office, so as soon as you start to receive surveys, you're going to be able to go in here and start to populate those. And we're happy then that everything has pulled down as it's expected to. So the next thing that we'll do once we're happy everything is in our database tree as expected is we're going to access the daily reporting. And we do that via the actual well by right clicking and selecting reporting, daily reports, or again we can access that from the shortcut toolbar along the top. And the first report has already been created as part of the pre-job process, and that was so that some of the information that we needed was already included within the data that was sent to the field. But what we would now need to do is we now need to look at adding some extra information in here before the job starts. So the first thing I'm going to change here is the date. And we want to change this so that it is the date of the first day that you started. Of course, this would have been created in the office and the date will not be correct. So very important that you get this date changed so that it is correct and you're happy with it. The next thing that's very important is to change the well status, because it's no longer upcoming, it's now active. Now, in terms of being in the field, you probably don't think that this makes a lot of difference, but when this gets pushed back to the server, it will update on the server to active, and it makes it searchable within the server database, and the coordinators and the managers then all have access to see what wells are currently active. So the well status is very important, and it's very important that if that changes at any time during the job, if for any reason you go into standby or at the end of the well, you know, you're complete or you've TD'd or you've sent your end of well reports, then this needs to be updated, and that way it's kept up to date in the server. So be aware of this and adjust it as necessary. We're now going to take a look at the well data and personnel. So that's accessed via this menu up the top. It can also be accessed via this shortcut toolbar. Now, prior to this information being drawn down, the job number will have been entered by the coordinator in the office. So this should just be double checked to make sure that it ties in the way that you were expecting. And then you're now able to fill in any relevant details that are required in here. So for example, you can select the state and the county. So in our case, if we select our state as Texas and our county as Carnes County, and when we select it from down here, that will populate up in the state and the county section on the list. The other thing that we will select is we'll select our rig. So the rig that we can select will be from a drop down menu here, and the one that we are going to want to select is 142. If your rig is not available from this drop down list, then this needs to be something that's updated in the rigs list, which can be updated by the office, and then it will be available to select for future from this drop down menu. So we'll fill in any other information that we need. That's all I'm going to fill in this particular section at the moment. And then we come across to the personnel. So again, it's up to you as a user or as a company how much information you want to put in here, but as an absolute minimum, you will be entering your directional drillers or your MWD engineers, depending on who's on site. But of course you can enter all the rest of the information as well. Now again, these will be available from a drop-down list, and you should be able to select the appropriate person from that list. If the person that you're looking for is not on the list, then they will need to be added into the personnel list, which is available from the tools menu, and they will then, same as the rig, it's also available from the tools menu, they will then be available for you to populate in here. And then you can put in your time on and off for each of your personnel, hit apply, and then come back to the daily report. We'll now take a look at the daily cost. So this would be the next thing that we would look at entering, and the daily cost can be accessed via the view menu or from the toolbar. If we access our daily costs, what this will give in the description section, you will have a drop down where you have available options, and these options populate from the well cost sheet. So if there is any options that you're looking for that are not available from here, then these would need to be added into the well cost. But everything should be here based on the fact that this has come directly from the office. So all the relevant costings should be in here along with their cost codes. So for us, it's on the first day. There will be operating in here, so we're just going to select operating. It will pull in a code, the code that is associated with this particular cost, pulls in the value, and you can then enter in a quantity in here. We'll then hit apply and close. We're now going to take a look at our inventory, and we're going to get all of the inventory, all of the tools that we've got on site pulled into the inventory and set up. And this is an important process at this stage, because as you move forward and as you start to build BHAs and things like that, then the components that are available within your inventory are going to be available to you as you follow that process. So this is a good time to put the inventory in. And the inventory can be accessed via this shortcut button on the daily reports itself, or from the tools menu, tool inventory. So with the tools inventory dialog now open, we can start to go ahead and populate the inventory. It's all fairly self-explanatory in terms of the information that you would enter, but there's a few things that I'll point out that are quite important. The first thing is, in the type column, there is a drop-down option when you select in the cell, and that allows you to select the type of component that you're entering here. So for example, if it's a mud motor, we'll select mud motor at this point. This becomes very important when you are inserting components into the drill string from the inventory, because if we select to insert a motor from the inventory, the program is going to look for any motors that we've got in the inventory. If your motor is not correctly selected as a motor, if it's selected as something completely different, the program will not see that, and therefore it won't be available for you to select. So this is the first thing that's going to be important for you, to make sure that you've got the correct type selected. The next thing that you have to be aware of is that there has to be a date on location entered, and the checkbox for on location also needs to be selected in order for the software to understand that this is actually in the inventory. So although we may have an entry in the inventory, if the on location is not checked, the software says, okay, this was in the inventory at some point, but it's not actually on location at the moment. Therefore, it will also not be available for you to select. And of course, hand in hand with on location goes with the date of it on location. So you need to make sure that both of these things are entered correctly. For the purposes of this, I'm going to just copy and paste my data in here. You can do this manually, or this is very copy and paste friendly. So if you have your details in Excel format, you can highlight them and then paste them in. And here we can see we've pasted in 33 items, various different types, ODs, IDs, lengths, connections where appropriate, some weights. They're all on location with the date that they arrived, and I haven't filled in any of the rest of this because they're not failed, not ready for backload yet, not in the hole, and they're not dirty. So now that I've filled this in, I'm happy. I hit the save button and I come out. So the next thing that we're going to do is, from the report options, we are going to select the option to set default activity code description. This is really important because When you're filling in your slide sheet, there will sometimes be gaps in the time from the end time on one line and the start time on the next line. When you pull this data into the daily report dialog, it will fill a line in for these gaps. So for example, if we finish a slide and we finish the stand at 12 o'clock, and then we do a connection and we don't start drilling ahead again until 12:05, there will be a 5-minute gap. When you pull this data across, that 5 minutes will be displayed on a line on its own in the daily reports. And here is the default activity code that you would select to have filled in there. So in most cases, you're going to want to have this as code 10D connections and surveys. And then you can put your description in whatever way you want, but survey and connection makes most sense. Once you set this, and you can set it to whatever you want, but 90% of the time when you have a gap in time in your slide sheet is going to relate to the fact that you've got a connection. Of course, when you pull this into the daily report, you can still manipulate it, but 90% of the time it will be exactly the way that you want it to be, so you won't have to do anything. So this is just going to make life a bit easier for you. So once you've selected this, you'll just hit apply. So with all the information that we've now set up, we're ready to start filling in the daily activity section of the daily report. So we'll start on the first line, and we'll start at midnight. We'll fill in the end time. The start date is going to be 0 because we are still at surface. Course length will populate automatically. We don't have a BHA in the hole, so that gets left blank. But we have to select our phase. So this is going to be our surface phase. And our activity at the moment is going to be skidding the rig, so 1H skidding rig. And we just put in a description of whatever we want. I'll now hit save. And at this point, we are now going to be picking up our BHA. When we pick up a BHA in the daily activity, we have to then select it from the drop down. But I haven't yet gone in and made my BHA up or put all the relevant information in, so we're now going to go ahead and we're going to do that. So to do that, we open up the drill string editor, which is available from the tools menu, or it's available from the shortcut button at the top of the user interface. Now that we're in the BHA dialog, we can see that there is already a BHA being entered here, and this was done in the office before it was sent out. And it can be used, that was used basically as a placeholder, so that as a field engineer, you've now can go straight into this and start filling in all the relevant details. Depending on the setup, you may find that there's already a populated BHA in here. If you know exactly what you're going to run and you already have the sizes, this may have been done in the office. But in most cases, you will be presented with a situation where your BHA is here, but you have to fill this information in yourself. We have other videos that go through creating a BHA in more detail, but I'll go through just 2 lines of this just to, as a very brief reminder. If this is something that you need more information on or you're not familiar with, I would recommend looking at some of the other training videos before you then continue here. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we'll select our component from the drop down. In this case, the first component will always be a drill bit for us. And we right click. We don't have any in our inventory, but we will have some in our catalogue. So we select to insert from catalogue. We select the component. We'll select our size. So in this case, it's 12 1/4. And here it's PDC bit we're going with. So select line 1 and hit insert. And once you insert that, it will pull all the relevant data and you can fill in any bits, the rest of the bits that you want that are important, like TFA and grading, etc. The next line we're going to put in here would be our motor. With our motor, we will, by right clicking on the line, we will this time insert it from an inventory, and we can see that we've got 2 motors in our inventory. And again, as I mentioned before, it's only going to be things in the inventory that are selected as mud motor from the drop down menu. If you know you've got something, if you know you've got 3 mud motors in the inventory but only 2 are showing, then the reason for that will be because you've selected the type incorrectly in the inventory. You need to go back and change it. But in this case, this is exactly as I was expecting. I select the relevant motor and I hit insert. And I just keep doing that for the rest of my BHA until I'm happy that I have everything that I need in here. Now, for the purposes of this and to make life easier, I'm actually going to just pull my BHA in. So here I'm going to delete this BHA. Hit yes. I'll add a new BHA. And we will select import BHA. Select my import file. And my import has been successful. So I now only have one BHA in here, and it's my surface BHA, BHA1, I've got my MWD1. If for any reason when you turn up on site and it's not the first BHA, maybe you weren't involved in this, you have to follow the same numbering convention as they have in the rig, then of course just adjust your BHA number appropriately. And once we've got our BHA in here, we're happy. We can hit save and we can close this out, go back to our daily report, and because we've now created our BHA, we can go ahead and fill in our second line. So the second line is going to be us picking up our BHA, so 0200. Now in our drop down, whereas before there would have been no options available, we now have our surface BHA available. The phase copies down from the line above, it's the same, I'm happy with that. And my activity this time is going to be 60 pickup BHA. And this is a very, very important thing that you need to remember. When you are picking up your BHA, you have to use the 60 pickup BHA activity code, because this is a marker for Well Seeker to understand that this is the point at which a given BHA, in this case our surface BHA, has been picked up. When you then lay down the BHA, you will be selecting 6p lay down BHA. This then represents within the software the point at which the BHA was picked up and laid down, and then everything that's happened in between, the software can use that, and it can use that for calculating the data in your performance report and for your KPI statistics. So now we'll put in a description, just pick up BHA1, and we can hit save. Now that we've got everything set up, we can start to send data back to the server database. To do that, we'll go back to the main user interface within Well Seeker, and we'll go to the Tools menu, and we will select Real-Time Data Exchange. So within the Real-Time Data Exchange dialog, there are a few things that we need to enter and select. The most important thing will be initially will be the ICDS server details. And this is the port and the IP address for the relevant server so that we're sending data back to the correct place. Now we will have already filled this in for the remote data fetch, and as a result of that, this information should already be populated in here, and it's just a simple case of double checking that the information that you have in here is correct. The next thing that we're going to want to do is we need to select the relevant well that we are working with. So you just have to go down each of these levels one at a time, operator, field, facility, select our well, so it's 3H, and then we select the actual wellbore, because it's only actual wellbore data we can push back. You'll never see information regarding a plan in here. So now we have selected the well that we want to push the data back for. We have got the ICDS server information in here, so this is now, we know the data is going back to the correct server. On the lower left hand side, we then have the option to select the data that we're going to be sending back. So as default, we're going to have surveys, daily reports, drilling parameters, engineering, geosteering, create well on report. One of the other things that we'll want to select in here will be check for new plans. And what that does is, when we push data back to the server database, at the same time it will check underneath the well to see if there are any additional plans under there that we do not have underneath our well. So if there is any plans in addition to design 1, it will flag up with a message in here to say that there's a new plan available. At that point we can then go and we can pull that down from the server database. So check this option here. Now down on the lower right hand side we have our data transfer rate. For field operations, you're probably going to want to set this around about 30 minutes, but as a company you can determine what you want to do. It can be as little as 1 minute, it can then be as many minutes as you want. The other option is at any time if you have data and you want to send it, you can just select the manual push option. For this particular example, I'm going to set mine to 1 minute, but you wouldn't generally do this in the field. You don't need the update rate to be as great as that. I would recommend you probably start with around about 30 minutes. So once you've got this update rate selected here, you can hit start. And we can see that it will come up with a message to say real-time data exchange started, it will give us the time. And the time until the next update will appear here and it will count down. So in our case it's counting down from a minute. If it was 30 minutes it will count down from 30 minutes, etc. And at any time you can hit the manual push option. So if I hit manual push now, it comes up manual push started and it will tell us what's happening, and the thing that you're really looking for here is file transmission successful. If there are any errors, if there's something not right, they will populate in this messages section, and that will give you an indication, or it will give you a guidance as to where to look for what the problem might be. And it may be your port, it may be your IP address, it may be something else. Once this is started and it's up and running, you can come along here and you can close this dialog and it will continue to run in the background. And we can notice at the bottom right hand side of our screen, we've also got some information regarding the fact that we are currently pushing data, and we have if there was any issues, this wouldn't be green, this would be red, and we have a countdown to give us some information as to when we can expect the push to happen again. We can come in and we can look at this at any time, and when we do, again, this is still up and running with the same setup. The only way that you can stop this would be to either close the program or to physically hit stop. So if we just close this down again and just leave it running in the background. Within Whale Seeker, we also have the ability to receive WITS data and push this back to the server as well. This is all set up via the Slidesheet, and the WITS data will be pushed back to the server every second. Everything WITS related is covered in another training video, so I'm not going to be going through any of the WITS features in this video, but if you are receiving WITS at this point, you'll be setting this up to push back to the server as well. So now that we have everything set up and we're pushing data back to the server, we're going to start drilling, and at this point we can start to populate the Slidesheet. Now the Slidesheet can only be accessed when a survey is open. If we don't have a survey open, you're not going to be able to access your Slidesheet. So here we've got our surface survey open, and we can access the Slidesheet from the shortcut toolbar along the top, or by right clicking at the actual well level, going to reporting and selecting Slidesheet. So Slidesheets are associated with BHAs, so depending on how many BHAs you have available, you will be able to select the required BHA from the drop-down list. In our case, we only have one BHA, so there is only one option for us, but this is the first thing you have to be very careful about. Make sure when you start to populate your Slidesheet that you have the relevant BHA selected. At this point, you now just start to fill in your Slidesheet. So this can be done manually, or if you have a WITS feed, then it can be pulled in and created automatically. I mentioned earlier on in this training video that WITS will be covered in another training video, so for the purposes of this, we will just be filling this in manually. So the first thing that we're going to do is we'll put in the date, and the date's very important because when we try to pull data from the Slidesheet into the daily drilling report, it will be looking at the referenced BHA, and it will also look at the date of the daily drilling report. And when it looks at the Slidesheet, it's looking to match those before it can pull data. If you have this in incorrectly, it will not be able to find anything to pull in. So then we'll put in our time. Our start date is going to be 0 because we're from surface. Course length 95. If you want to enter it in as an end depth instead of a course length, you can do that via the settings menu and just uncheck this slide record input course length. We then select the state, is it sliding or rotating? In this case it's rotating. And then you can go ahead and fill in all the rest of your parameters based on what you have selected while you're drilling. Now, to make life a bit easier and to make things a bit quicker, we're just going to copy and paste the data in for the rest of this slide sheet so that we've got some information to work with. And we'll hit save, and we can see that we've got a couple of slides on the magnetic tool face, the rest are all on gravity tool face, and then we have rotation as well. Some things to note here are, we mentioned this earlier regarding the spaces in terms of time between certain lines. So you can see that on some of these lines, the end time and the start time are not the same. And in that case, when we pull this information into the daily report, it will fill in that dead space with a line, and for us it's going to be a survey and connection. So now that we've done this, we've hit save, we're going to go and we're going to pull this information into our daily report. The slide sheet can stay open on its own. We don't have to close this in order to do that. So we will go from here and we'll go back to our daily report. And we now want to take the information that was in our slide sheet and we want to populate the daily activity with it, the daily activity section with that information. So you could do it manually, but that's just going to be duplication of work. The easy way to do it is to select the option Get DDR from Run Sheet. And when you select this, it will pull all of your data that's relevant for the day into the daily activity section. And as I mentioned, you can see that these areas of dead time between the end time of one line and the start of the other have been populated in here with the survey, connection and survey 10D activity, and the description is in here as survey and connection. And you can pull this information in as often as you want, or as frequently as you want. So you could fill in a few lines and pull it in. You could do it every hour, every few hours, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you pull some information in, when you pull information in again, it will just pull it in from the last line in the DDR. It doesn't overwrite the information that's here. So that just pulls in any new data that you have, basically. And once you've pulled this data in, we can populate the drilling parameters section up here, and we can do that by selecting Get Params. And when we get the parameters here, it will just look at all the various parameters that we've got in our run sheet and the slide sheet for this given day, for this given BHA, and it calculates all this information for you and it automatically populates it. At any point, the user has access to a data validation tool called Check Activity Against Slide Sheet. And what this option does is it checks the information in the daily activity section of the DDR against the slide sheet, which is where this data was originally populated from. And it checks to make sure that there are no discrepancies. And these can usually come about if someone goes into the slide sheet and makes a change, or someone goes into the DDR and makes a change and doesn't make a similar change to the other sheet. This is a tool that just allows you to very quickly either check against the individual slide sheet or check the slide sheet against all reports. And when you select this option, it's either going to say activity grid matches slide sheet, or it's going to come up with an error and it will point you exactly at the line that doesn't match, which will allow you to then go and say, okay, so there is an issue between 9:57 and 10:10. That line does not match with the slide sheet. You can then go and have a look at the slide sheet, have a look at the DDR, work out which one's correct, and then make the relevant adjustment. So if we now complete our daily activity section for the day, and I'm going to do that just by copying and pasting again, just so that things are a bit quicker. We're going to finish off with some circulating, pull out of hole. As mentioned before, very important, we've got this option here for laying down the BHA. The program now knows that the BHA has been laid down, and on my next line we have got running casing, and here, because the BHA is no longer in the hole, we have removed it from here. And the way that you would remove that is, if it's already there, there's no option to select it so that it's a blank cell, so you just click on the cell and hit the backspace or delete, and it will delete that particular line. Just delete that. And we hit save. We now have our completed day. But just as importantly, we have got a completed BHA. So in this given day, we picked up the BHA. It just so happens we have also laid the same BHA down. Even if it wasn't the same day, anytime you lay down your BHA, you are then able to go back into your drill string editor and update your performance report. So if we open up the drill string editor, the depth in, depth out, date in, date out, these will all have updated automatically because this was assigned in the daily report and it now knows exactly the depth in, depth out and the date in and date out. We can also go to our performance report. Within our performance report, we can grab any data that's not already populated in here. We can take it by selecting this option here and it will pull in relevant information from the daily report. We can fill in any additional information in here, additional comments. We can put in the reason that it pulled out of hole. So here it was section TD. Any other comments that you have. If it was a failure, then you would have access to fill in all this information over here. But in our case, it wasn't, so we're all good. We hit save. We can also go in and fill in any relevant data within here. So for example, we're going to be looking at your grade in and your grade out. So you could put your grade out and any other relevant information relating to the BHA. And you hit save, and then you can come out of this. I should also mention earlier that you could fill the fluid type in at any time as well. So we'll put in water-based mud, PVYP, as much information as you have, you can populate that in here as well. And once you've filled in everything, you've got your day complete, you can then select to add a new daily report, and then you will follow the same process where you add a BHA where necessary, you will continue to fill in your daily reporting, you will go to your new slide sheet for your new BHA, you will fill in the parameters as it's been drilled, you can select get DDR from run sheet, you can update your parameters, drilling parameters section by get parameters, and again, once you lay down your BHA, you will then also be able to go into your drill string editor and update the performance report and any other sections within that until the well has TD'd. At the end of the job, or at potentially at any other point during the job, you may have a requirement to send tools back, in which case you may have to organise a shipping ticket. And we can do that from the main user interface, again by right clicking at the actual well level, going to reporting, and then we have an option here for shipping tickets. Shipping addresses, you can enter your relevant shipping addresses in here, and these will then be available from a drop down menu within the shipping ticket interface itself. And if we select shipping tickets here, there are now a few things that we can look at. So as with a few of the other options within the daily reporting side of things, you would create the new ticket by hitting the big green plus button. You can stick your ticket number in here, you can select the relevant date. From and to can be selected from the drop down menus. Any comments that you have, so here we can say end of job backload, and then the available tools that you have in your inventory will show up underneath this select tools option. And you can go through these and you can check them individually, or there's options up the top where you can actually select them all. So in this case, we are going to say that as an example, these are getting sent back. You can select all of these, hit save, and you can print this out and it will print out your ticket. If you are actually sending all these away, you can also select the option to ship tools. And when you select ship tools, what that will do, comes up and it says tools shipped. If we go into our inventory, it will have unchecked the on location, and it will have filled in the date off location as the date that you have selected, based on the date that you selected that option. And these will now all basically be showing up within your inventory. It saves you coming in here and doing it yourself. Something to be aware about, and I mentioned this at the beginning though, is if this is now classed as off location and this on location options are unchecked, if you go in to, for example, the shipping tickets again, if we were to create a new shipping ticket, these options are greyed out. They're not going to be available to select anymore, because as far as the software is concerned, as far as the program is concerned, these are not in our inventory anymore. Although they're listed in the inventory, they're not showing up as being on location. So again, just a little thing to be aware of is if you ever see a tool but you're not able to select it, then it will be because it's not selected as on location, and there will be a date entered in the off location section. So you have to make sure that you not only check on location, but you have this cell empty as well. At the end of our well, once we have all of our surveys and our daily reports and slide sheets all complete, and we're getting ready to send it back to the server for the final time, there are a few things that we want to check to make sure that there are no errors and to make sure that the data is in there as accurately as it can be before it goes from the field for the final time. So the first thing that we'll want to do is we're going to check within the daily reports, and within here there is an option for data validation. Now we have another training video that specifically relates to data validation, and it goes through this in a lot more detail. I'm just going to point out a few things here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on them. For more detailed analysis of the things that you would need to do at this stage, I would recommend that you go and you watch that specific video. But in our case, we'll go to data validation, and we're going to select check activity against Slidesheet all reports. And this just goes through each of our daily activity sections in our daily drilling reports and compares them against the slide sheets where the data was pulled from. And it's checking for any discrepancies there. So what we're really looking for is this option to come up to say activity matches slide sheet. If there are any errors, it will pop up there. You need to go and investigate those, make the relevant changes, come back and run this again until you get the point where the activity matches, and then we know we've got confidence that the daily reports and the slide sheets all match each other. So that would be the first thing. The next thing that we're going to look at is the daily activity editor, and that's accessed via the actual well by right clicking, going to reporting and selecting daily activity editor. I'm going to do that for a different well that's got some more information in it up here. And if I do that, what this feature does is it checks through all the daily activity sections in each of the daily drilling reports, and it looks for some basic errors. Things like, do you have a pickup and a laydown code associated with each BHA? Other things like, are there sections in between phases or in between BHA runs that are blank? Do all of our times match up? So does the end time on one line and the start time on the next line match? If these don't, all of these things are going to be highlighted, and it will give you a list of these potential errors for you to investigate. So once you see this, you would hit OK, and it will open the daily activity editor dialog. And what this does is it gives you a table with all the daily activity information from each of the individual daily drilling reports, and it puts them all in a table. So you can see as the date changes, this gives you everything. And this is really useful because it saves you going through each of the daily reports individually and having to flick between them. Now, anywhere in the table that there is a potential issue will be highlighted in red. The only exception to that rule is anywhere where there is an activity that details non-productive time, that will be highlighted in red, and that's totally expected. So these two lines here, the program's not flagging that there's any issue with them, it's just showing us that these are MPT. So we'll scroll down a little bit and we'll see our first options. So here we've got two cells highlighted in red. So the first one is the BHA, and we can see we've gone from surface to tangent, and then we've got a gap here in between these two lines where there is no BHA. There should be a BHA in here because you've not laid down this tangent BHA, so that would need to be adjusted. You can do that from the drop down, select the tangent, and when you save this and go back into the daily report, this will be adjusted within the daily report. The next one that we can see here is the phase. And the phase, we're in the intermediate phase, and then for some unknown reason we have this line in here that doesn't have intermediate, it has surface, and then we go into intermediate again. So again, that doesn't look right, we need to make an adjustment to that. Scroll down a little bit further, MPT, that's fine. And here we've got some errors, and we've got an end depth that does not match the start depth of the next line. So we can adjust that just manually. We can type that in, 90, hit file and hit save. Scroll down, there's nothing else in here, so we can close that. We'll save it, and then you can go back in and double check, and there's nothing flagged up there at all, so that just opens this up for you to take a look at. So now that we're happy, we've gone through, we've found some errors, we've made the adjustments, one of the final things that we want to do is go back to our daily report. It's the wrong one. We'll go back to our daily report, and we can then change the well status. And in our case, because we've now gone through and checked everything, we're going to change this to end of well report ready. Or you could change it to end of well report sent if the end of well report has been sent directly from the field. The main thing to understand is that the status here always needs to be as up to date as possible, so that it is very clear when it's checked on the server what's happening. You know, are we active? Are we standby? Have we TD? Is the end of well report ready? If you select end of well report ready, this tells the office personnel that the data has been sent for the final time, it has all been checked, and as far as the field engineers are concerned, it's good to go, ready for the final check within the office. So once this has been selected as end of well report ready, it will just be a case of going back into the real-time data exchange, doing a manual push for the final push to push everything from the field to the server, and then that will be the end of the job. We've now gone through part 1 of the server database operations training, where we've covered the pre-job and start job procedures. Before we move on to the second part of the training, we will take a look at some questions. So I'll read out the questions, and once I've read out the question, if you hit pause, try to answer the question yourself and then hit play and see if your answer matches mine. Question number 1. What are the two pieces of information that are required for the remote data fetch and the real-time data exchange so that WellSeeker can connect to the company's server database? The two pieces of information you need are the IP address and the port number. Both of these pieces of information will be supplied by the office, and they're very important because they specifically point your local database towards the correct server database. If these are not correct, you will have an error and you will not be able to push any data. Question number 2. When the field engineers are pulling data from the server, is it possible to limit the wells they have access to? Yes, it is. And this is controlled via the well permissions, which can only be accessed when accessing the server and if you have admin rights. And within this dialog, this is where you would put the name of the field computer and the relevant well that they have access to, and when they do a remote data fetch, they will only be able to pull that one well down, nothing else. Question number 3. How do you add an external file? By right-clicking at actual well level and select external files at the bottom of the list. Question number 4. Once started, does the real-time data exchange continue to run if the dialog is closed? Yes, it does. So once you start this, even when you close the dialog, it will continue to run. The only way that you can stop it is by reopening the dialog and hitting the stop button. We've now completed the question and answer section, so we'll now move on to the exercise section. The exercise section is split up into two sections. The first part is for office personnel and the second part is for field and office personnel. So the first part, the office personnel should access the server database and set up a job to the point that it is ready to be fetched by the field engineers. And the reason that this is only office personnel is because it will only be office personnel that will have direct access to the server database. The second part is for field and office personnel. So go through the steps as though you're turning up on a job, create a new database and then pull the data for a while from the server and set everything up to the point that you're ready to start pushing data back. The well details should be provided by the office and will likely be the example created in the first part of this exercise. The reason that we would suggest that office personnel do this as well is so that they become familiar with the steps and then they can also help if there's any issues in the field. They are familiar with the process and they are able to help troubleshoot a little bit. If at any point you become stuck, refer back to the video for a refresher. This now concludes part 1 of the Well Seeker Introduction to Server Operations training video.